One caveat on today's slides is if you don't see how they apply to how to apply them to your project, please come to office hours and let's discuss it. These are really meant to be very broad and open to sort of fit with any project from any discipline. So quick reminder of the Translational Seat Awards purpose. We're really advancing to advance translational and applied R&D efforts toward the development of spin-out companies and startup companies, out-licensing of UMass IP or copyrighted works, scalable community engagement for societal impact, social impact ventures, and other external entities. So in other words, we're not prescribing how this work should be translated and applied in the real world, but we want to find a way to create real world impact. And these are the vehicles that we would call vehicles for commercialization, broadly construed, that are the tools we think of as relevant. So the quick reminder, the full proposal guidelines are available at either of the links below. And this is what they have to say about, these are the 6 elements that they are really, where we really focus on the initial conceptualization of the elements of a commercialization and impact plan. And, show in the proposal how your team intends to commercialize using those elements, but not just in the executive summary. It also applies to the statement of work, the milestones, budget, people, and I probably should have, I'm certain I should have added, and I will add for the slides that get distributed, DEI planning, because there, of course, that enters into your people, but it also enters into the potential impact and the real world problem you're solving. Because one of the pieces of DEI for us is are you solving a real world problem for an underserved or overlooked group of people. And how does that sort of fit into the context of what you've already seen? Buried here is this curve that I'm sure you saw in the info session, if you attended an info session. The idea is that a lot of UMass projects, research projects, are down here at this basic research level, grant funded, but as results are forthcoming from those projects, as new knowledge is created, as inventions are created, as creative works may emerge, or training materials or data or all sorts of things, you really can move into this area of translational research. And in this area, what our awards are intending to fund, the Translational Seat Awards are intending to fund, is to move these translational research projects up to being ready for investment or other funding from angel or venture capital, SBIR funding from the federal government, donors who would contribute to a high impact nonprofit, or even customer and stakeholder support. But to achieve that, you really need early commercialization and impact planning efforts in concert with this translational research. And so what we're really trying to do is combine both, give you an opportunity to combine both to move your project up to this ready for investment and for launch beyond the campus towards this self-sustainability by combining these and by including this in the solicitation. So the other thing I'll say is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. It's natural at this point in your efforts to not know totally where you're going, but to define a little bit of a destination will really, I know from my 25 years of consulting and my 6 years of working with ventures on campus, it's really helpful in focusing you and in getting increasingly refined as to what you're trying to do. So that's the bigger context for that. It's also important because most startups, this bringing in commercialization and impact planning is also important because most startups actually don't fail because the technology fails or the research is faulty. Your research is fantastic and we want it out there. Most startups fail for reasons unrelated to the foundational research or the IP. Either the team builds something where there's no market need, or you run out of cash before you can actually achieve what you're trying to achieve, or it's not the right team. And we are trying to preempt those problems by encouraging this early commercialization and impact planning. It turns out actually the scalable social impact ventures have similar challenges. This is they need markets and customers regardless of how they're funded, the venture is funded, but they also need funding and they also need a team. This is a table from a Harvard Business Review article authored by the head of the Mass Challenge, which is a huge global accelerator for new ventures. They take on everything from technology ventures to great social impact ventures. And this was their take on what a venture needs to, or a team needs to make the decision about whether social impact venture should be a for-profit or a nonprofit. And you'll see that all of the issues that we're just talking about are concerns there at the earliest stages of social impact ventures. And so again, this is another reason why we want to facilitate your planning here. And finally, really to have impact, you need to have the great translational research, the scope of, in the case of the proposal, the scope of work and thinking about the future translational research even beyond that. But you also need a plan for commercialization and impact to really be able to realize that, to get beyond the campus. And so, so we really are wanting to combine these two at this point, bring them together, help you bring them together at an early stage. It doesn't mean it's cast in stone. It's a plan, not a promise, but the plan actually will help you improve the plan. I just want to share a couple examples of what we mean here. This first example is of Career Village. It's a nonprofit, tech-enabled organization. The mission is to give every student who wants it some career advice over the web. So they're democratizing access to career information and enabling underrepresented people to access it more easily. I met the founder, Jared Chung, when I mentored him at the Mass Challenge, and he had a team of 2. They didn't have a business model yet. They didn't have any mentors. They didn't have anybody to advise. They were just starting to sort out what their business model will be. Today, I just want to share their impact metrics because I think these are fantastic examples of the kind of impact metrics that we want to think about, even if they're many years away. 4 million online learners served, 190 countries served, 150,000 volunteers, the 4 million, 8,000 student-defined career tags. So that's, real careers that students are getting advice about. They founded this organization in 2011. They were part-time at that time. Really, when I met them at Mass Challenge, they were just getting started. So a team of 2 exploring different approaches for doing this. By 2016, they were getting help from Dell. By 2019, they had 3.5 million student users and 28,000 registered volunteers. And they just launched this AI career coach last year, which I also read is backed by Salesforce. And they've had help from Google. They are a nonprofit, but this is a nonprofit that's really operating at scale. And so you could explore more at Career Village, but I just want to hold this out as an example. The second example I want to give before we get into the nitty-gritty is Clarity. I know many of you have heard of them. They are a UMass startup. They're for-profit, deep technology company, tough technology company. They've had a couple of pivots. I met the founder, Julie Bliss Mullen, I think in 2014 or 15, when she was already thinking about this. Their impact statement is that they aim to destroy PFAS forever. We'll talk a little more about them, but since 2017, they've had local grants. They've participated in accelerators. They had both pre-seed funding from investors and phase 1 SBIR in 2019. Their initial product idea was an electrochemistry-based water purifier for the home market. They had a very small prototype. They got a phase 2 SBIR in 2020. They have closed in 2023. They closed a seed round of $15.85 million from investors, and they have partnered pilots at scale. So they've pivoted from their small home market water purifier to get rid of viruses and bacteria in the water to commercial grade, commercial scale destruction of PFAS contaminants on site. They're in landfills and looking for pilot sites now. You can see from their what they're thinking their impact is. They're going to mitigate risks for their company, for their customers. They're going to eliminate offsite trucking. They're going to reduce labor and maintenance costs and help them move ahead of the competition. And so those are the value propositions. They're not saying anything about the technology there, but if you go to their website, they've got lots of white papers and they've got information about their technology. So again, this is a company came right out of UMass, aiming to scale, very ambitious for impact, solving a big problem. So I'll pause for a minute before I start to really dig in. Any questions, thoughts? Okay, I'm going to keep going. All right. So I want to remind you there are 6 interdependent elements in the commercialization plan we've outlined for the Translational Seed Awards: product candidates, unmet needs, differentiation plan, intellectual property plan, the startup spin-out team, and resources to support development beyond the Translational Seed Award funding. In addition, I would lump into commercialization planning, thinking about the roadmap and a source document for really synchronizing your translational R&D with your non-R&D efforts. So, and that includes grant applications and investor pitches potentially and time-based milestones. We'll get to that all. But by looking at all of these things together, along with your research plan, you're building the case for a financially viable venture of some sort, scalability, and ultimately impact. So, in essence, this is how you all are expecting to go from where you are now to achieving external impact. So I'm going to go right through the 6 elements and describe them to you. Keep in mind that I could have had lots of swirly lines and all of that because they're all interconnected. The first one I want to talk about is the product candidate or candidates. And this really starts with your foundational research and IP and your founder's purpose. So what is your team really aiming to do? That's something that is often overlooked in talks like this, but I want to emphasize that you've got an impact that you want to make in mind. You want to make already in mind, many of you. And so, we're not suggesting that you abandon those purposes or those values. What we're aiming to do is to have you incorporate that and then find a way to really realize that in the real world. And so, to build on that foundational research and IP and your purposes and ambitions to advance the foundational work towards an early version of a product. What I think it's fair to say that none of you have something that could leave the lab and be put to work in a site where you're not tinkering with it and babying it along. For something to really be out in the real world, you need to be, R&D needs to be moving toward therapeutic candidates or proofs of concept or prototypes that are bridging the gap between working in the lab and working every time for a customer or a stakeholder who, and so that's what we're thinking of as the product candidates. Ultimately, you're going to want to get to this, a reliable core product with a value proposition to customers that is something that customers really need, that's doing something customers really need done, that's making their lives easier or better or adding value to them in some way. There are always additional product elements around the core product. So maybe it's training, maybe it's customization. We don't know yet. You don't know yet. And even when you think about it, you're not going to know yet. That's totally fine. This is just the start on having a way of knowing what road you're trying to get on so that you'll have some idea of where you're going, sort of a direction to things. And so you're really, this is what you envision creating for positive impact on customers and stakeholders. And that you could charge money for ultimately, or you could get a donor to back ultimately. The unmet real world need is really from the, again, built on your foundational research and IP, what problems can you solve and your purpose, but now you're really looking at what problems can we solve, what proposed unsolved and undersolved problems do we think we can address? And then digging below that, many of you have an idea of what you think the proposed unsolved problems are. Some of you have probably even put those into grant applications to the NSF or the NIH, but now is the time to really dig into who has the problem and how severe is their pain, how many have the problem, and will someone be willing to pay to solve the problem? And this is where really you're really starting to develop primary evidence. This is something I-Core training speaks to, because what you're ultimately wanting is to know that when you build something, when you create something, you're going to be building something or creating something that you can build into a product or a service that people are going to want, that there's someone who needs it, to hark back to the frequent startup failures, frequent cause of startup failures. So this is where if you have early evidence that you're creating that someone wants or needs, add it into your proposal. If you are thinking that you are going to do a local I-Core program or a national I-Core program, add that into your commercialization and impact plan. This is a great opportunity to really get in touch with the people who need what you can do. Differentiation plan relates very closely to both both the product and the unmet needs piece, but really it's a way of looking at it from the competitive landscape perspective. You've got lots of competitors. You already have scientific competitors, but as you go out into the real world, you'll have business competitors, indirect competitors. Career Village has both for-profit and nonprofit competitors. Many groups do. There might be indirect competitors who have alternative technical approaches. There might be emerging competitors. And always a competitor is the status quo, because people have been getting along without what you want to do for a long time. It may not be perfect. It probably isn't, but do they have what they recognize as a problem is often a huge question in customer discovery? And then can you compete with the status quo? Can you actually do something that will rise to the level where people will actually take action? Is really important. So this is all from the customer perspective. What you're looking for is a unique match between with customer and stakeholder needs and what you're going to build. And customer and stakeholder needs are really hard to change. So chances are, if you have the insight that customer and stakeholder needs are close to what we have, but we need to do something a little bit different, you're going to have to think about how in your translational research you're going to do that something a little bit different so that you can stand out from competitors in the eyes of your customers and stakeholders. And you can see here I've included a statement from Clarity's website. They are addressing the status quo, which I love, and they are saying that Clarity is the first PFAS destruction technology in the world that is being deployed in a full-scale system. They are explaining the other alternatives involve are not as good, and this is their differentiation statement. So again, these are important things to think about. They've been thinking about it since 2017, but now they've got this fantastic statement, and they've been iterating on it. So the intellectual property plan. So, I just want to again acknowledge the Tech Transfer Office, which is so important to everything we do here. They're going to help you establish your foundational intellectual property, and they work mostly on patents, but they really are here for any inventor, artist, social scientist, any faculty member, any graduate student who is thinking about copywriting or in other ways protecting their work so that they can translate it into a startup, spin out, nonprofit, anything like that. So go talk to them. They're stretched thin, but they are incredibly knowledgeable, and so it's really important to talk to them. And there's also something called the IP landscape. You need to be aware for a commercialization plan of, do you have freedom to operate? Is someone else actually, are you going to have to license technology from someone else, or is somebody else copywriting something that is close to what you have, and you're going to have to be careful of the way you operate? But it's typically the main concern is if someone has patented something that your patent depends on, and so that's something to think about early on. There's the UMass, the foundational UMass IP, but if you have a NewCo, whether it's a NewCo for-profit or nonprofit, a new entity, it's time to think about IP. Are you going to be creating patents? Many disease-focused foundations are nonprofits, and they hold intellectual property rights. You might think about what you need to hold as a trade secret. So you may have know-how that you will develop as you move forward, that you'll want to keep within the entity so that you are the ones who really know how to do that. Trademarks can be very important in branding. And branding is really, it's not just confined to consumer products. It's really about a representation of your entity that will make people really want to work with your entity and think about your entity, what your entity is doing. So they can be very related to impact. You might out-license technology that you've developed. You might decide that what you want to do is make your software or your data open source, and then rely on some services or some expertise within your new entity that will actually provide services around that, or that your interface might add value and people will pay for that. We don't know, but this is all open for discussion right now, and we want you to think about it. The final thing I'll mention here is contracts and employment agreements. As you move toward thinking about a new entity. A lot of things get done in the university for you automatically, but all of these things are ways of creating an entity that can achieve self-sufficiency. So this is all about how you're going to create and build upon your foundational IP. So, and then your startup team. So, you know, Career Village is very lean. They started with 2 people. I looked this morning at a database that shows where they are now. They've got about 15 employees. That's still incredible. That's a pretty small team, but they've got the people they have there to manage their whole scaled up enterprise. And so a question that I'm sure seems far off, but really you want to think about now is, who else are you going to need to build this new entity? Who will you need beyond your founding team? So, and that could be people from the outside, but it can also be people on the research team now. So the idea is really just to give some thought to who, how many, when, so that you're prepared to think about all the things you need to do to build this build on the translational research toward impact. Another lens through which to view that is, what resources do you need, financial and other. So how much funding are you going to need to achieve self-sufficiency is always a huge issue for all new ventures. That goes to your business model. I haven't talked at all about your business model, but all of those elements of the commercialization plan ultimately lead you to what is the business model? How will we be able to operate self-sufficiently? There are lots of potential funding sources for you to think about. Grants and donations are non-dilutive. That is, they're not going to say, we'd like a share of your entity. But investors are also venture capitalists, sort of the prime example of this. Will take a share of your company. You might have industry partners. Could be other nonprofits, or could be a nonprofit, could be a for-profit. Out-licensing is another source of potential funding. And then ultimately customers and sales. If you have a nonprofit, it might be your donors who are the customers who are going to provide funding, but you also need, of course, the customers that you're going to deliver services to. So you start to think about all of that. And then there are usually in-kind resources for, certainly IALS Venture Development, the ART provides those. External advisors and mentors are often in-kind resources. I-Corps, the local program, is an in-kind resource. The national program will actually provide some funding. There are free SBIR coaching resources. There's a lot of things. So, we'll get into the details in office hours or at other times when you need to know about them. But all of this estimates the funding and contributions you're going to need to reach self-sufficiency and impact.
Karen, we had a question in the chat.
Please.
It says, how big should a team be? Is there a point where it can be too many people and it could cause work to not get done?
That is a fantastic question. And yes, it can be. You want to really think about, conventional wisdom is that 1 is too few and that 5 is too many at the very earliest stages. But rules are sort of squishy on that. 1 is, there's really a lot to do if you're going to try to translate research into something that's going to go out and be used externally. There's a lot to think about. And so often I've seen teams think about, the priorities are doing the research and raising funds to do the next stage of development. And sometimes that's a 2-person job, sometimes that's a 1.5-person job. It's often that, I've seen people try to do that themselves. That's really hard. There can be a research team, especially when you're still on campus. There might be a research team that is doing the research that's not involved in the entity. And so there's sort of a squishy thing. But if you're thinking about when you start an entity, you're really going to want to think about, oh, sorry about that. You're going to want to think about who will do what. Often the most typical arrangement is a CEO who could be somebody from the outside or could be someone from the research team. It's often a postdoc. So Julie Bliss Mullen, who founded Clarity, founded it with another graduate student and with her PhD advisor initially. But she was doing the lion's share of the work and she was raising the funding. At the end, I'm going to give you a link to a great blog post where Julie talks about her team development. There are plenty of other examples. I think it really comes down to what jobs need to get done and who's available to do them. Is that whoever asked that question, is that helpful?
Yeah, that was me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Beatrice. All right, so I just want to touch on, and I'm going to spend a little time on this, timeline and milestones. So this is a big issue is how do you think about timeline and milestones? And I've tried to build out a little bit of an example here. So you'll see that I've gone out basically 3 years, 2 years in quarters and 1 year in just a year. I've tried to include both activities, what you do, and milestones. So for example, here, translational research is the top line. Experiment 1, experiment 2. This could be a social science experiment, an experimental lab, but really thinking about demonstrating, the milestone is now we've demonstrated efficacy. We've demonstrated that our technology can actually make a change. This demonstration of efficacy is completely made up here, but you can imagine that this is the first step in thinking about, can we actually create impact in the real world? So, very, very important. Does our technology work? Translational research and product development are very interrelated, and I almost put this develop demo up here. It's sort of, it depends on what you're doing, where you would say research ends and development begins. So so you can sort of see how they're related. But also customer validation, these customer discovery interviews I mentioned that I-Corps teaches you how to do. Those are really the first evidence that someone needs what you're building, or that you can build something someone needs. IP, lots of different milestones along the way. Filing an invention disclosure with a TTO, that's an action. They might take a couple of, they might take a while to evaluate it or ask you to get more data, which might come from one of these experiments. And then they might file a provisional patent. The filing of the fact that a provisional patent has been filed is a milestone. It actually makes it a little less, your efforts a little less risky and adds a little more value to them because now you've got a patent pending. If you're going after foundation support, writing the proposal, submitting the proposal, all of those are action items. Receiving the funding, that's a milestone. So I've tried to differentiate here. The other thing I really want to encourage is people often say, oh, I'll divide these up and put these on different spreadsheets. I really want to encourage you to have that detail in a more detailed sheet when it makes a lot of sense. I actually have a template I'm happy to share with you to do that, but it's really helpful to consolidate too. And the reason I think it's so helpful is that it helps to identify interdependencies. So I've actually seen, not anybody from UMass ever, but in other situations, I've seen startups that, when they'll have mismatches, they'll have business milestones on one sheet, and they'll say, we're going to have our first sale in the first quarter of the next year, and they'll say their product is going to be complete in the third quarter of the next year. And someone will say, oh, are you signing up people and getting money from them before your product is complete? And sometimes that's true, but not often. And so it's really important to recognize these interdependencies as you're building the company or the entity, or even the project before you formed an entity, because you will see what you need to do to enable the next step. So these 2 letters of support might be destined to be included in an SBIR application. Or even if you are wanting to do things in your lab in a partnership for innovation application. And so thinking through all of these piece parts is really important. I didn't put anything down here for regulatory. There are many projects with different regulatory pathways, but this is a placeholder to say this should be there too. Any questions on this?
We do have a question in the chat.
Yes.
It says the IALS translational grant is for 1 year. Should we indicate on applications about the translational grant timeline versus what is after the deadline?
Yes.
So I wrote deadline, but I just meant, yeah, like the seed grant period versus after, and sort of what might be expected.
Yes, you're going to do a work plan for what you're proposing to do with the translational seed award budget. And the context for that is the rest of this. What would you do after? What would you do during that would speak to some of these commercialization items that would be off budget? Would you do a regional I-Corps program? Would you, so you can imagine, doing if you translational seed award funding, the idea here is to accelerate research translation. And to do that, there are these other pieces that have to sort of be planned for and brought along as you're in parallel with your translational research. So typically, your, a translational seed award, maybe you wouldn't be ready to start until Q2 2025, but let's imagine you started in Q1, you would show that, and you would show the 12 months of translational work funded by the seed award. But then you might also be thinking, well, what should we be doing during the year to get more funding so that in Q1 2026 we haven't just run out of money? So you might be thinking about what funding to go after during the year, and we can help you with that, figure that out. But that's does that answer your question, Emily?
Yes.
Okay. And then, yes, we do want you to go out 2 or 3 years to see the trajectory of the project. So campus resources, I just want to remind you of all these campus resources, the Technology Transfer Office, IALS Venture Development. We have a variety of resources to help you, including startup law office hours, MBA teams that can help you ultimately dig deeper into all of these questions that we're raising this morning about we don't expect, in other words, we don't expect you to have all of the answers to this. We expect you to have, we know you all have thoughts about these things, and those thoughts can be, that commercialization plan can be refined during the year in parallel with translational seed award funding. I-Corps at UMass Amherst is an incredibly important resource because it prepares you for the national program. It gives training about how to go talk to potential customers or potential stakeholders without biasing them or without trying to sell them on what you're doing so that you get an unbiased view of their needs. National I-Corps team, which not every, I think not every project would be eligible for, but many will be, is $50,000 to do more of that. I also don't want to overlook the UMass libraries. There's a fantastic business reference section on the website, but also a wonderful librarian who can point you to business references, and those would include nonprofits. There's also a wonderful, really special resource in the Science and Engineering Library, the Patent and Trademark Reference Center is funded by the USPTO, one of, I think, 80 in the country, one of the only 2 based in a university in New England. It's really a great resource. They have specialized resources and reference support. And then the Accelerating Research Translation Training. This is our first training session, but there will be more training coming soon. So, consider how to engage with all of these in parallel with your translational research plan. And finally, I have some relevant links. So, some of these are from Harvard Business Review. For those, if you can't access them, the link given there, you can access it through the library, but it's complicated to explain that access. So on this page I'm giving you at the bottom, to access the Harvard Business Review articles through the library, there are instructions there. And then there is an article on Y Combinator, how to spin out your scientific scientific research out of a university. Very good advice. And then last but not least, Julie Bliss-Mullen, who's the founder of Aclarity, was interviewed for this fantastic Don't Waste Water blog. And she really talks quite directly about how she bootstrapped Aclarity on its journey. She talks about team development, their initial ideas, how they got started. They got started with an award from the UMass Innovation Challenge. So she talks about the role of the tech transfer office. And so that might be a really helpful podcast for you to listen to. It's about an hour, but it's actually, I thought it was really good. So I'll just conclude. We'll open this to questions, but I'll conclude by saying, sign up for office hours, please. Go to this link and you'll see the link to the office hours sign up at the bottom of the page. So do that. Contact us by email at askiles@umass.edu, and you'll get a copy of these slides.